Think about it this way. What is it like for you when you're sitting in the room with a client as the psychotherapist and you notice something's not quite right here? I think my client has left the room, not physically, but emotionally, psychologically, like they're not present with you, don't feel synced up with them. It's a very awkward moment for a therapist because we realize that they're in autopilot. The lights are on, but nobody's home, so to speak. It's a very awkward scenario. And then you might even finish the session and think something like, something should have gone different there. I think I missed it. And it leaves like a feeling of angst there for you as the therapist. Well, just welcome to this episode. Today, we're going to be focusing on what you can do as a clinician to notice that you are losing your client in session and what to do to bring them back. And I'll just reframe this concept through a life model lens that we may lose a client in session, but it's not always about the content. It's about losing the synchronization that can be really present in a psychotherapy session, a shalom, a sense of we are with one another. And we lose that because the brain is actually disconnecting. We're dealing with a different part of the human brain when that happens with a client. It's actually something we can learn and grow from, both in terms of our own approach as a psychotherapist, but also in terms of who this client is and what their unique and specific needs are, what their triggers are, and what they need from us. So let's plunge right in and talk about what these 5 cues are. First thing that you might want to notice is that there are shorter, flatter answers coming from your client. So maybe you head into the psychotherapy session and the client is energetic and connected or even passionate, even if it's with difficult emotion that they're feeling. But then something can happen and you start to get one-word replies, maybe less elaboration, energy drops. This actually happened to me in a session yesterday, and I was thinking, what's happening right now? And it happened to be a session that was virtual. I couldn't see the person because it was the camera was off. And I was thinking, what is going on? Is this person distracted by something in their environment? Or have we hit a nerve? Is it something that's going on with them emotionally? And so I had to kind of be quiet within myself for a moment and consider what's happening. And what I noticed is my anxiety started to go up. Am I losing this person? Is something I've done? Is a question I've asked? And then I had to remind myself, no, it's probably not anything I've actually done wrong, and I don't need to be feeling that angst or shame or imposter syndrome type of spectrum of thoughts, but more what's going on with my client right now. Let me get curious, let me get relational, let me synchronize with where they are so that I'm not pushing something that is where the session isn't going right now. So let's just consider, if we were to go curious with the client, we may think something like, maybe they're withdrawing because something that came up inside of them or outside of them has caused them to feel something. So when we quiet ourselves internally, then we allow that space of quietness that's coming into the session to be something that we're curious about and that can proceed and promote a growth in the client versus something that's going to cause a feeling of desynchronization and maybe even codependency. Then we start pushing for something from the client, they start feeling the pressure, and either they shut down more or they come up with inside of themselves with another part of self that wants to please. I mean, all kinds of things can happen when we don't just name it gently or synchronize with the client with a lower voice tone, maybe a softer way of speaking, and a sense that there is nothing that's expected from us, that this session is fully for them. It's what they need. It can be a very healing and growth promoting experience if we as the therapist don't get offline in our own psychological selves. Another thing that I notice happening quite a bit is what I would call intellectualizing or rambling. I notice this when I ask a client a very specific question, maybe about their childhood, maybe about a traumatizing experience that they've been through. And I notice that they use a certain word before they start to intellectualize or go into their left brain. They'll say, well, maybe I think this way, or maybe I feel this way, or I probably feel this way. So it's like this maybe, probably, like this ambiguity around, I don't really know how I feel or how I felt, but I'm going to try to predict or guess at it. And so I'll back up in those moments with the client and just notice inside of myself, okay, let's notice that the client is no longer going into their, checking in with themselves emotionally. They're no longer in touch with themselves. They're now going into this other realm of, in life model, we call it verbal logical explaining, where they use their left brain to explain what is happening in their subconscious or their right brain. And as they're doing that, there's this sense of maybe them going away from me as the therapist, and I feel a distancing that's happening, and even that they're going away from themselves. And I think as a psychotherapist, I have to be really careful. I think we need to be careful as helping professionals, because in that moment we could really shame the client by saying, no, 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 I'm not interested in hearing about what your verbal logical explainer says, what your left brain logical mind says. I'm more interested in the deeper part of you. It really, I don't know if it's as much the words that we speak as therapists as much as it is the way that we speak it. And so I think in those moments, it's important to recognize first what's happening and then slow the pace that's happening, and reflect the pattern. And then gently invite the client, or the person that we are there helping, the participant, back into their own body and to their own feeling. Even helping them gently just notice the dichotomy between where you were and then where you went, and then what it feels like to come back to where you were. A gentle explanation. I oftentimes call this, like, shift in the session, like a body double for the client. It's like, okay, it looks like you, it feels like you, but or maybe it looks like you, it sounds like you, but it doesn't necessarily feel like you. I lost you. I lost the essence of your connection with yourself and what that brings to the table when your core self, or your true identity, as we say in Life Model, comes into the room. How do I slow my own nervous system as a psychotherapist, stay in touch with myself, and then gently invite the client to get back in touch with their own self when I hear this intellectualizing that may end up with some, rambling. But what I'll notice sometimes with certain clients is it continues to happen. Like, let's go here. Let's go here. Well, how about she'll like this answer? And then I'll gently have that conversation of, it's not really about what I want or what I like. What I'm noticing is you're not present with yourself right now. And I can see that and feel that because of some of the words you're using. And so let's try this again. And I'll go back into, this is what we were talking about. Here's what we know so far. Here's what you've told me so far. And let's see if we can deepen or enrich where we were, so that we can get to a further development of understanding of what's really going on inside of you. Number 3, the next thing I would say that we could really pay attention to as helping professionals is the shifts that happen in someone's body language or eye contact. Now, as I spoke of before, that's hard to do if it's a virtual session with the camera off. You can't see that. And that's why I think it's very important to have, if we're doing online sessions, that we see the body as much as possible, that we don't, eye contact's a little crazy when you're doing a virtual session because you don't really know that someone's looking at your eyes. And I think that's why in-person sessions probably are the most powerful. But hey, we do what we can do in psychotherapy. We are taking the client with what they're comfortable or what they're able to do. However, if you have a client in front of you and you can notice those subtle shifts in body language or eye contact, you may notice that the client is looking away more than they were before. And it's not just that they're looking up to the left to kind of remember what, or to the right, to remember something in terms of what they were, a memory or such. It's that they're maybe looking down, or they're talking about something emotional and their eyes go down. Maybe they're fidgeting, or they're closing their posture, or just going still. I notice this a lot in marital therapy sessions because I'll start off the session with, let's, turn to each other and try to have these deeper conversations while looking at each other in each other's eyes. It's not a staring contest, but just to continue to come back and glance. And it never fails that when the client in the marital therapy session is talking about the things that they're feeling about this relationship, about their attachment pain, that they start to look in another direction or look past their spouse, behind them, because they're really shifting into a place where they're not present in the room with other people as much as they're internally maybe disconnecting from others and caring for their own pain. So underneath this may be shame, maybe fear of like, how are you going to respond to me? Maybe anger, or literally dissociation. There may be an activation of a low grade stress response that's happening in their body that causes them to not be back and forth, mutual, give and receive in mutually satisfying ways, as we say in Life Model, but more shut off, shut down, judgmental, relational circuits off, really, for lack of a better term. If their brain is going into that, I just want to make a problem person feeling go away, my mind is locked onto something upsetting, I more aggressively judge or fix myself or others, I just want to fight, flight, or freeze. Any of these aspects or any of these statements indicate that the relational circuits are off and I'm disconnecting. And that can definitely happen in a one-on-one session with a client as well. They may be feeling some things that are causing them to not be able to stay in their relational brain. And we say in Life Model, it's in your best interest to always live with your relational circuits on. Now, is that possible? Well, we want to move toward that, but reality is our relational circuits do go off. They go off, and it's very quick. It's very subtle, but we as psychotherapists want to be able to discern when that's happening and really attune to that so we can get the client back. What we want to do is pause the content, really attune to what's happening, not further shaming the client for not looking at us in the eye or looking at their partner, especially when it comes to marital therapy or cultural context too, because when they're talking about certain things in different various cultures, you don't look, you don't make eye contact. It may be regarded as disrespectful. So what we want to do is pause and attune and help the client to regulate themselves, synchronize their own nervous system, as we talk about in the first standard protocol of Life Model Informed Therapy. We want to really help the client stabilize their nervous system and then come back to the topic, but proceed with caution and proceed with gentleness, right? Like, how do we move back in? Because it's kind of like when you get a massage. If you go into the massage therapist, to the masseuse, and you say, oh, I have all these knots in my back, they're hurting me so much. and then the massage therapist just goes after those knots, our body is going to tense up in other places. And then we'll leave the massage. Yeah, those certain knots went away, but my body is feeling tense and uncomfortable in other areas. And I think that's a great analogy for what happens in the psychotherapy office. We can push in to some topic that we feel like is the right thing to talk about as the therapist, but we could be leading a client down, re-traumatizing them when we are too abrupt and too intense and too focused on an agenda rather than taking it at the pace of their nervous system. We work at the pace of the nervous system. That is the most important thing as a therapist to recognize. We do not push someone beyond the pace of their nervous system. Now, we want to take it right to the edge and keep pushing forward. But if we overwhelm the nervous system, we've just done more damage than good. So it's very common in my practice for me to notice that it's overwhelming, to back up even further than we were before, and then gently lead into where we want to go and see how far we can go before the client goes offline. In fact, in the past, I've had a client come in for intensive, and he and I had an agreement. We said, if this gets to be too much at any point, we will stop this intensive and we will pause, and we'll go back to a follow-up session where we discuss what was going on for you, how far did we get, and what do we want to do next to help you move through this content. Because just because he had signed up to come to my office for 6 hours does not mean that his nervous system is going to be ready to get through those 6 hours. And as a psychotherapist, I'm not as interested in him getting through those 6 hours as I am helping him actually get healing. So what do we need to do to notice, can your body, can your nervous system handle this? And how can we back up and punt, so to speak? The next item, the next cue that I'd like to talk about is that as therapists, we need to really be careful about when the session starts to feel like it's about us rather than our client. Sometimes therapists' anxiety can actually drive the pace and fill the silence and steer toward a certain outcome. And I think I was referring to that a bit ago when I was talking about, do we want to get all those knots in the back dealt with? And that's our main motive, but we're causing problems in other areas? Or are we looking at what I call lassoing the big picture and pulling it all in order to help the client heal in every way possible? So let's just notice, as therapists, we need to be noticing our own countertransference that may be going on in session. We need to notice what's happening with the client that makes me feel uncomfortable. Maybe something I don't really understand, or something that's happening where the client's distressed, or maybe they're upset at the therapist that makes it feel like it's about me. We need to notice our own triggers and know, am I in a countertransference type of way? I know just in supervision this past week, I was talking to the supervisees about this, and I mentioned, you just told me this story about this person who was really hurting, and then you gave this person some advice. Why do you think you gave the advice? What was going on in your nervous system as a therapist that you felt the need to tell the client what you think they should do, rather than backing up, checking in with yourself and your own discomfort, and having a dialogue with the client that leads the client into finding their own path forward, rather than them taking on your concept as a therapist of what they should do. So we really need to understand these things as therapists, because otherwise the client is there becoming mini-me's to the therapist rather than becoming their own unique, true identity in terms of who they are. So next therapy session where you feel like this might be happening, do a self-check. Whose needs am I serving right now? And then return to curiosity over control, over giving advice. A long time ago at one of the trainings I was at, I was with a friend I met at the training, and he said to me, whenever I start to hear myself talking a little too much in session, when I'm hearing my own voice, I imagine the word wait right behind my client's head. Why am I talking? And I thought, wow, that's really good. I love to remember that. I know in the ladder of humility that Pete Scazzaro talks about in his book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, he says in that ladder of humility, I think it's like the 8th rung is I talk less. As I mature into being a humble and a receptive person, I am going to talk less. I'm going to get more curious. I'm going to be more gentle, and I'm going to push in with wisdom and effectiveness rather than out of my own compulsion or reactionary response. So this takes us to the last of the 5 cues. And this cue is repetition that is happening with the client without movement. Have you ever noticed that? That a client is circling around the same story or complaint with no new insight or felt shift. That I notice this a lot of times with traumatized clients, specifically as a CSAT, a sex addiction therapist. I'm noticing this with betrayal trauma clients, that they come in and they're telling the same story again and again and again. And it feels like at the end of the session, we didn't get through that much information because they're looping. The conversation may be happening in their talking brain without really connecting in their right brain, or their right brain is screaming for help and not feeling like anybody's actually hearing them. So the idea that I would have as a therapist in that type of situation is to either name out loud, I've heard you say this story a couple times. Now we have to be careful that we're not shaming the client in that, like, oh, you're being repetitive. You already told me this story. No, it's more like, I just want to notice something here. I noticed that you've said the same story a couple of times. And let me ask you, what's different about saying this a second time or again today? Because I know we talked about this last time. Or what do you need from me? And, I might even, because of experiencing this so often in therapy, I might even just not say anything to the client about the repetitive nature of the story, but just lean in and hear the words and reflect them back, even verbatim. What I hear you saying is this and this and this, and then you felt this and this and this, and that made you want to this and this and this. And I can understand why you would feel that way because, right? So I'm going to validate, or it makes a lot of sense that you would feel that way. And it's like you to try to figure this out, right? To try to go to that next level, to try to figure out what it was. And I think as we reflect back verbatim or in summary and then validate, and in Life Model, we call that the VCR method, that validation has to come before comfort, and that we repeat that again and again to the client's satisfaction. So we can actually see the nervous system of the client relax. And yes, as psychotherapists, we can do this with our clients, but we can also do it with our loved ones, whether it's our spouse or a sibling or our own child or a dear friend. When we reflect and validate before we say our opinion, before we talk about the thing we can do, the model we can use, we just are going to be with. We are going to attune. We're going to help the client feel felt in the therapy session so that their brain can actually match our level of brain pain. And all throughout the Life Model Informed Therapy curriculum, we're talking about from standard protocol to standard protocol 1, the synchronization of the self, and standard protocol 2, which is attachment to a manual, and standard protocol 3, which is a manual healing. We talk about matching the brain pain of the client. That's really what we want to do. We want to be with. We need to be present in our own body, attached to our own nervous system and our own subconscious, so that we can offer that to the client and continue to invite them into that way of relating as well. And when they go offline, go back and gently retrieve them and bring them back. So all 5 of these cues are ruptures in attunement and attachment. They're not client failures and they're not therapist failures. They're going to happen. And I think as a skilled therapist, we are going to be able to find out what the rupture is, acknowledge it, even if it's just internally, and go back to where we need to start again in order to move forward in the session and in the healing process. So repair is always available. We need to notice and name it, even if it's just in ourselves, in order to bring the synchronization back to the session. Relational brain skills that we talk about with the life model are very important in terms of this. We need to notice if we are activated in the relational brain skills that we have been practicing as therapists, so that we can continue to offer that as a model for the client's brain and build capacity in the client and in ourselves as we continue to relate to them in their unique situation. Everybody has situations. There's nothing new under the sun, as the Bible says. There is so much that we can do as psychotherapists to understand patterns in human behavior. Yet each human has a unique and very special way of being in the world and experiencing their own pain and their own trauma. And we want to honor that and meet with that unique creation of God that's sitting in front of us and treat them in that way that's special, because they are special. The way that God sees each of us is that we are unique and that we are favored in our uniqueness. There's no one person who's favored more than another by God, but there is such an enjoyment that God has for each of us in regard to our uniqueness. And that's how we want to show up with our clients. The wisdom and love of God is flowing through us to our clients. We're speaking to them with that same sense of synergistic love and appreciation for their unique way of being in the world. So just a quick rapid fire recap on those 5 cues. When you have clients giving shorter, flatter answers, or intellectualizing or rambling, or shifting their body movement, their body language, or eye contact, or when the session starts to feel like it's about you, or you get a lot of repetition from the client without a lot of movement, these things are cues to let you know the client's no longer with you. And it's important for you as a clinician to calm your own body, calm your own soul, stay connected to God, and get creative with how you're going to help get the client back online. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm Monica, and if you want to go deeper with the life model and the 30 core concepts of life model informed therapy, we have a full series of trainings available at cftinstitute.com, and you can start exploring for free on our Learning Hub. And remember, healing spreads when counselors live in joy. We'll see you in the next episode.